Two. Okay, here we are, everybody, and welcome to part 2 of presenting the path. I'm just checking all the technical things are in place, and this is module 2 of discovering Buddhism. The mind and its potential was module 1, and that's going to be interesting actually as we talk about the outline, particularly the Lamrim outline today, that in Tibetan text, they wouldn't talk about the mind and its potential at the beginning necessarily. Well, actually, one text does talk about, Buddha nature at the very beginning, but not in the Gulega tradition. But the reason why Lama Zopa likes to start with mind is because, in the Western cultures, we don't necessarily know what it means, about mind and karma and past and future lives. In our culture, it was just kind of, obviously, it was the background culture for the Buddha in India at that time, and then in the Himalayan community. But for us, not so much, right? Coming from a theistic tradition, we were created, our culture, our culture would say that we're created by God, and then we get judged. I'm just really speaking rough terms, we get judged and we go up or down basically for eternity. That's the kind of theistic, it's not criticizing, but it's just not the Buddhist view. So that's why I think Lama Zopa really makes sure we understand the mind from the Eastern kind of philosophical point of view. So that's why module 1 starts with that. And then here we're now presenting the path. And this map, if you like, is then used throughout the rest of the course. Indeed, all the teachings that we'll come across are about, can fit into the Four Noble Truths or the Lamrim, which is what we're looking at here. So as usual, we start off with a motivation and a little meditation together just to create the right mind in which we plant our seeds, the right actions that we're going to do. The action here is listening and talking and studying together. So to make sure they become the best possible seeds we can have, the best investment we can make, we need to make sure we're motivating correctly. So we're going to motivate for our full enlightenment for the sake of all living beings. That's the best one. Let me just move on the slide a little bit so we can use these verses as our kind of center for this motivation. It's usually 2 lines here, which are the first 2 lines are about refuge, and the second 2 lines are about the mind of enlightenment, sometimes called bodhicitta. So you can see in the title there, refuge and bodhicitta. And this is a very common way for Buddhists to center their positive mind. So let's just spend a moment thinking about those 2 minds of refuge and bodhicitta, both actually modules later on in Discovering Buddhism, as I keep saying. So refuge, first of all, for a Buddhist, it would be taking safety or taking, trust in the Buddha as the teacher, the Dharma as the teachings, and the Sangha as those people helping us on the way, who are quite highly realized helpers. Taking safety in those from all the difficulties that we experience. We can think of all those difficulties and just, what's happening right now around the world. I mean, just to think about that is enough to want to turn to somewhere else for, comfort, isn't it? But it's more than that. It's the, as we looked at last week, it's a very profound sense of, being in samsara, being in a circle of having to take a human body at all, with its many difficulties, getting sick, getting old, ceasing and having to take another one. That very process itself is, the ground on which all the other suffering kind of springs from. And the Buddha says, very fortunately, in the third noble truth, that doesn't necessarily have to be the case. If we can work out the causes and the formula, if you like, of samsara, we can free ourselves from it. So whatever level of conviction you have that the Buddha, Dharma, Sangha is a refuge for you, you got to bring that to mind. And the second two lines are then thinking, well, it's not just me, it's actually every living being is also stuck in this cycle of uncontrolled rebirths, having to take a body and a mind again and again, without any say where they go. And because we have a close connection with all these beings, personal connection, actually, if we think about it in terms of sentient beings having been with us since the beginning of time, then we feel moved by compassion and love. It's my duty, if you like, or it's my responsibility to help these beings. So then that shifts from just you to then countless living beings, and that becomes then your world, is to think about all the others and help as much as you can. The best way is becoming spiritually perfected or enlightened, awakened yourself. So that's what's described in the second two lines. By the merits we create through this listening and studying together, may we become the fully perfected version of ourselves to help others. That's a beautiful aspiration, really beautiful. Let's read those 4 lines together 3 times. And so I recite the first time in Tibetan, and the second time and third time we'll do in English together. Sangye chedang saki chanam janchu badu dani kapsuchi dagi chenyang gi pesanam gi jola penchi sangye jopara sho Sangye chedang saki chanam la janchu badu dani kapsuchi dagi chenyang gi pesanam gi Drala Penji Sangye Drapara Sho. And just once in English, so I made a mistake there. So I go for refuge until I'm enlightened to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By the merits I create through listening to the Dharma, may I become a Buddha in order to benefit all sentient beings. Okay, thank you, everybody. Let's now look at the outline. Welcome just to those people who just joined us. I think we have Carly. You're very welcome. Is it Carly? I'm not sure if I'm saying that correctly, but you're very welcome. Nice to see you. So week 1, yes, last week we looked at the Buddha and the Four Noble Truths. Exactly who was this person called the Buddha who lived 2,500 years ago. We talked about him being born into a royal family. He wasn't awakened when he arrived. That was something he did through effort, which is, good news for us because, although we're probably not born into a royal family, I can't speak for you, but I certainly wasn't born into a royal family. And, through practice and renouncing the right things and keeping control of the right things, he managed to find a middle way between those two extremes, perfecting the practice of meditation, and use that meditation to turn the wrong views into understanding exactly how himself and others existed, and then became enlightened, awakened underneath this tree in Bodh Gaya. You heard this, have you seen, anyone seen the tree in northern India in Bodh Gaya? There's this beautiful stupa that kind of reaches to the sky with these 4 pillars on each of the corners. And on the one side, there's this beautiful, I think it's called a pipal tree. Obviously, Bodhi tree is something we labeled afterwards, but I'm not sure exactly. I'm not really a botanist. Anyways, it's kind of grown to this massive, beautiful tree, which apparently is not the original one, but it's kind of the cuttings of that one are from the original one. So that's still growing and living in this space, and it's beautiful environment to kind of be where this enlightened being, well, it's where this being, this only human being, became enlightened. So it's a very special, sacred place. If you can see it one day, I would recommend that. It's quite in a poor area of India, Bihar, one of the poorest states in India. A lot of poverty, malnutrition, and corruption. But a lot of Western tourists do get there as a pilgrimage site. So that's like the top one, top Buddhist pilgrimage site recommendations. Obviously, when we can all fly again. Anyway, so when we can enlighten, the first thing the Buddha taught, and we can call him the Buddha, the awakened one, the first thing the Buddha taught them was the Four Noble Truths. Does anyone remember the Four Noble Truths, the long version or the short version? Can anyone recite them for us all to remind me and others?
I'll have a go.
Go, Stuart. Yeah.
Noble truth of suffering.
Yeah.
Noble truth of cessation of suffering.
Yeah.
Nope.
Cause
of suffering.
Cause of
Okay,
suffering.
so what's number 2 then, Stuart? Try again.
Cause of suffering.
Cause
Yeah.
of suffering, good, right?
Cessation and path.
Path, yeah.
Right. Cessation of what?
Suffering, of course.
And the path to what?
Nirvana.
Enlightenment, nirvana, out samsara.
The path to the cessation of suffering. The path
Suffering.
to the 3. Yeah.
Yeah.
So suffering is the key. You want to all the way through. You could have put it another way, but that's just the way we work, really. So suffering, the truth of the suffering, different levels of suffering, then the cause of the suffering. So if you get the result, then the cause, right? And then the next two, cause, the result, and the cause, are the way out.
Yeah.
We talked about that, not strictly being a cause, a result, but dependent on the path, which is the fourth noble truth, to get the third noble truth, which is the cessation of all the suffering. And cessation of suffering, if we're talking about cessation of all the negative karmic seeds in the mind, and they've all gone, and even, you know, and all the afflictions, therefore, of which would arise from those, and all those have gone. You've got rid of all those seeds and all the afflictions, including ignorance, which is the supreme dictator. Remember, the one at the root of all that. When you've got rid of all those, you are then liberated. You are then reached nirvana, and you have become what do they call it? Someone who's liberated at that level. Remember this name?
An
arhat, exactly. Yes. What's the English translation for that one?
Buddha.
Is there an English translation for that one? Jake, are you online here? I can't see all the boxes. Jake, do you know what that one is? Or Ian?
Is it like Foe Striker or something?
Foe Striker. That sounds very Star Wars, isn't it? Yeah. I like that one. Foe Destroyer. Yes.
That was it.
Think of, you know, the Death Star and Destroyer. Yeah. So because they destroyed the foe. And what is the foe? The afflictions and the seeds, right? Especially the ignorance. So great. Very nice to hear that. Thank you, everybody. And then once you've freed yourself from samsara, there's still something left in the mind. That's not the end of the story. There's something like imprints. So like sometimes they talk about when you've had garlic in the jar, you remove the garlic, there's kind of this smell left in the jar. Or like if you have imprints in the sand, you know, your foot's gone, but you're still this delve. So that's the way they talk about what's left in the mind. And that's still an obstruction because those imprints still have some barrier between you and being of optimal help for others. So then you still got a bit further to go. And then when you've got rid of those imprints, that is then enlightenment. Yeah. So there's a difference between liberation and nirvana and then full enlightenment. Sometimes they put full just to make sure there's a clear distinction between those. Yep. But the Buddha was fully enlightened, not just liberated. Still pretty great states, both of those, but enlightenment is able to do more, much more for sentient beings. So therefore, you know, Bodhisattvas are going for that, not for liberation. Yeah, we'll come on to that. So that leads us on to week 2 then, which is the lineage, Atisha, and the Lam Rim. So here we are in week 2. I'm just going to, if you could just mute yourselves if you're not talking, that would be helpful, because then we won't skip with the recording. That's the one. Okay then, so we looked at this quote last week. Let's just look at this again. Abandon negative actions, create perfect virtue, subdue your own mind. This is the teaching of the Buddha. And that's a really common verse that a lot of lamas use in teachings to kind of put in a nutshell, you know, what the Buddha was talking about. Abandon negative actions. So we're talking there about harm, abandon harming others. You know, at least that's the first step in the Buddha's view. Stop harming others. includes yourself, really. You know, you can't just, you know, forget yourself. It's harm across the board, you know, don't harm. And then if you can help others, that's like an extra step. You know, if you feel able to, then help others and yourself, right? Subdue your own mind. So here we're talking about, you know, the Four Noble Truths, subduing the mind so that it can be happy. You can be happy. This is the teaching of the Buddha. So we're going to keep coming back to that. That's an important thing to think about. So just to remind ourselves of the Buddha, and the lineage and a teacher is this topic in the outline. I'm starting to move my cursor around so I can see the text. So Buddha Shakyamuni is around 500 before the Common Era. Some people put it slightly more than that, but you know, if you're talking about 2,500 years ago. The Buddha then taught for 40 years around northern India, setting up a Sangha, a community of monks and nuns. And that lineage is really important from many points of view, especially from a Sangha point of view. So the Buddha first ordained monks and nuns way back, you know, all those years ago. And it said that, you know, that lineage of, you know, passed from one to another is still intact. That is really important. You can't just, anybody can't just ordain anybody. They have to have received it from somebody who received it from somebody, etc., all the way back when the Buddha gave the first ordination. I think, if I remember rightly, in those days, Buddha used to say, hey, bhikshu, and that was the ordination. You know, bhikshu, you know, hey monk, hey nun, bhikshuni. So got a bit more complicated since then. But you know, the minds were riper then. You know, to be born at a time when the Buddha was around, or a wheel-turning Buddha who's actually showing these and saying he's a Buddha and he's not lying, is quite rare. We haven't had that since. It's interesting to think about. We haven't had that since 2,500 years ago. But they come every so often, these what they call wheel-turning Buddhas, because they're declaring themselves openly, honestly, and they are really enlightened beings. And to be around when that happens is quite rare. You have to have a very special karma for that. Where we are fortunate because we're caught in the kind of the end of it, if you like, when it's disappearing, but we're still here, just about caught it before it disappeared completely. 2,500 years is a long time for anything to last, really, if you think about it, right? And especially to have that purity, that understanding, that clear connection with this great figure. So the further away it gets, the harder it is to be pure, the harder it is to kind of be affected, the harder it is to combat different things and be inspired. So that lineage is really important, and a lot of well, here we'll look at it here. So I've divided, there's lots of ways to talk about lineage. When we did the Larim retreat, some of you may remember, we went at the beginning of the Larim retreat, which we did it when we did that in December, 3 or 4 days we did. We started with a lineage prayer, which started off by thanking the Buddha for his qualities and his teachings, etc., and then going how it connected all these different verses, how it went through the different lineages of the Indian masters, of course, to start with. That's where the Buddha was, and then it went to Tibet with the Atisha, and then all the lamas, the lineage lamas, we could say, from Atisha to where we are. And then that comes through modern Tibetan lineages. We're talking about the Tibetan lineage here, obviously, because that's the tradition I find myself in. You know, the different lineages would explain the lineage differently after a certain point, depending on their own countries and cultures. So for the Tibetan tradition, anyway, talking about it gets to Tsongkhapa, obviously, is the big figure in the lineage. And then it gets passed on to his disciples, and then it gets passed on to Dalai Lamas. Dalai Lama, you know, retrospectively, the first Dalai Lama. And then the 14th, where we find ourselves now, the great 14th, they call the Dalai Lama right now, the Tenzin Gyatso. And then, you know, lineages, other masters that have kept that going, great realized beings like Lama Zopa. And maybe we have met some ourselves in person. I don't know how many lamas, you know, if you've met, but to meet these lamas and receive these lineage of teachings directly from these beings, that's very special. So that's just something I've put on the slide there. It says as one way of explaining it, where the wisdom and the kind of bodhicitta compassion parts of the path are separated out. So Buddha gave those wisdom teachings about realizing emptiness to Manjushri, one of his close 8 disciples, and then, of course, 8 bodhisattvas, and then that gets rediscovered or kind of revived by Nagarjuna a lot later. and then this kind of lineage of wisdom, realizing emptiness teachings. They're both, you need both parts of the path to work. You can't just have one or the other, but the kind of focus, if you like, of these lineage lamas has been that part of the path. Does that make sense? The Buddha said to have eight close disciples at the time, 8 close bodhisattvas, they're called. I can't remember all the names. These are not deities. They have the same name, but these are not the deities we talk about with the sword and the Chenrezig compassion. These are different. Same name, but different. Yeah, these are actually living people at the time of the Buddha, not the deities we think for tantric practice. Avalokiteshvara then was given the compassion lineage, if you like, and then that was revived or discovered again by a Sangha. Yeah. And then I'm not very good with the history of things, so I'm just trying not to say anything wrong. And then later on, this great Indian master, Bengali master called Atisha, united both of those lineages in his study and practice. And then that's a really special point in the lineage. So we're going to look at that in the next slide. Picked up by Tibetan masters, I mentioned, Lama Tsongkhapa through to our present day lamas. Yeah. Atisha. So this is an important point in the path, in the story of the lineage. This is his full name, Atisha Dipankara Sri Jana, born in Bengal. They're different names. I think what happens is when you get ordained, there are different levels of ordination for monks here we're talking about. So you get different names by the ordination master. Sometimes they'll give you different names, sometimes they'll keep the same name. So I can't remember what name he was born with and which ones he was ordained with. It says at the very beginning of the Lamrim Chenmo, actually, I was looking up because that's on the shelf above me, Atisha's life story as a way to kind of pay homage at the very beginning of the Lamrim. Tsongkhapa then writes as a homage to the founder, if you like, of the tradition. So it's a nice explanation there. Lived in 982 to 1054. A master at Nalanda University was asked to come to Tibet. He accepted and wrote at their request Lamp on the Path, founded a lineage of Lamrim teachings. Nalanda University was a very special place in India, like a big center for philosophical study and practice. Many great masters, including Nagarjuna, Shantideva, all went to this university. I think it was like 1,000 years, something like that. It existed before it got kind of pillaged and burnt or at the end. And at the point here, Atisha was, so respected at the university, the Nalanda, the monastery, the university, that they didn't want to let him go. The Tibetans asked, so don't want to give one of our best, But Atisha had this very strong connection to the deity of Tara, and Tara, advised him in some kind of meditative state that, if he went to Tibet, his life would be shortened, but the benefit would be much greater than if he stayed in India. So thanks to Atisha's sacrifice, he schlepped all the way to India, to Tibet, which isn't by no means an easy feat. In those days, you take your life in your own hands by traveling that far. Made it, and then they asked him to write something that would kind of summarize all the important points of the path, because at that point the lineage had become a bit fragmented in Tibet, and they wanted something to kind of ground it and put it into easy steps for people to understand. And thanks to the kindness of those Tibetans who asked, here we are with the Lamrim, is where we got to here. So his first text there was called Lamp on the Path, which is actually the text that Geshe Jampal is teaching us on Wednesday nights, which he started. I think we had 3 or 4 sessions last year. He's going to continue that in February. The very first Lamrim was ever written is a really special text, so I can't recommend that high enough when Geshe Jampal comes back online in February. His chief disciple, Atisha's chief disciple, was called Drum Trungpa, who founded a Kadam school, some great teachings from Kadampa Geshes, a new translation school, that's called, which later, kind of merged into Gelug school, and there we are with Tsongkhapa. Yeah, so that's important. We recognize the kind of creator or the founder, if you like, of this lineage of teaching is called Lamrim. So what exactly is Lamrim? 2 words. basically just graded path, steps, you know, nothing mysterious about that. It's something we're very familiar with in our culture, right? You know, we have exams, and you go from, if you think about, I always think about music, because that's kind of what I always want to teach sometimes. So in normal days, grade 1 to grade 8 is a common way to kind of do beginner music exams. So you go grade 1 piano, and if you're pretty good, you get to grade 5 or 6. If you can do grade 7 or 8 and you can get a merit or distinction in those, then you're pretty good for university and do a music degree there. So we're used to this series of steps, you know, and it's very helpful. If we went back and straight into the Buddha's sutras and looked at those texts that the Buddha, the master had written down that the Buddha actually said, it'd be quite difficult to get a grasp on the language, the context, what it actually means, which one do I have to do first, etc. And that's why, you know, His Holiness is saying here that, you know, to put it so clearly and systematically, and so it can be easily understood, and we can just put it in right into our minds and just get on with it, is really, really quite special. So if you read the Lamrim Chenmo, which is just the great, Chenmo just means great, Lamrim Chenmo, the great Lamrim text that Tsongkhapa then wrote. He wrote a few different Lamrims, a middle one and a great one. The middle one I don't think is translated fully into English and published. You get it's part of the basic program module, but it's not published, you know, in a book. So Lamrim Chenmo is the one that's published, and for the most part, certainly for the first couple of scopes, it's pretty much the same as the middle Lamrim. And as you're reading it, you can understand it. You know, that partly shows the Lamrim's great qualities, but also Tsongkhapa's great skill, because you know that it can be understood. You know, what is it? You know, 600-700 years later, you know, it was written in medieval times, that we can understand something so clearly. It was written in medieval language in Tibet. You know, I can understand it here in Leeds city centre. You know, all those time later is pretty stunning. And it's really, you know, it helps you understand that, you know, these teachings that the Buddha gave at certain points to certain people are for a very specific reason. And we're going to look at that now in the outline. I'll just read this quote maybe in case people can't read it at home. So this is Holiness the Dalai Lama speaking. You know, I'm quoting. What distinguishes it is its scope and clarity. It expounds the entire path from the way one should rely on a spiritual teacher, which is the very root, right up to the attainment of Buddhahood, which is the final fruit. The various stages of the path are presented so clearly and systematically that they can be easily understood and are inspiring to put into practice. So let's get to some of the details then. Here comes the technical bit. This is my own kind of explanation. I've just, you know, tried to break it down into little sections. Each section has more sections, of course, but here's an easy one to start with. So preliminary meditations, small scope, middle scope, great scope. That's kind of a basic pattern which it kind of falls into. Then let's look in some more detail at those scopes. So we'll come back to the preliminary meditation. The scopes have this basic pattern of part 1 of the scope, or kind of, you know, the first section of the scope is about generating the aspiration of that scope. The second part is then how you actually attain that. Sounds a bit cryptic, right? That's the formula, if you like, of how these scopes work. And this is what so, you know, always blows my mind a bit about how clever actually the Buddha was, because let's take a look at the first scope, for example. So the first scope aspiration is to have a happy rebirth next life. Precious human rebirth, you know, so you can continue a spiritual path. You know, that's the aspiration of a small scope practitioner. Yeah. So you've got a small scope and you've got the person practicing the small scope. Yeah. Does that make sense? Sometimes called the small capable being or the small scope being, depending on who we're listening to. Now to generate that, you know, how you actually get to think about future lives, Now, for us, that's quite important because we don't even, think about future lives at all in our culture. And this is why I said the Buddha is so outstanding, because he doesn't just assume, that you would have the right aspiration. He actually tells you how. He'll tell you, the wider context is it's going to be for your own benefit, and you'll get happiness, etc. And you go from happiness to happiness. He doesn't assume that you have the aspiration solid. He'll actually tell you how to generate the want for that happiness, because at the moment we're a bit stuck with, wanting immediate happiness and not thinking about the bigger picture. Yeah. And then the practices to attain that, how you actually get, once you've generated the proper strong wish for it, how you actually get a happy human life, next life. So that's going to become clear as we go along. So just keep in mind that pattern, that formula. So that's going to be important as we go along. Yeah, all clear with it? All following me so far? Okay, I'm just flicking through the box to see if you're all nodding. Okay, the outline. What are the aspirations then? So small scope, gain a precious human life, next life. Middle scope, liberation from all realms completely and forever. And then the great scope, enlightenment for the sake of all sentient beings. That's like, we could say grade 1, 2, and 3, or what's the way Venerable Rabina puts it? Something like primary school, secondary school, and university, something like that. And then Tantra would be a PhD in postgrad stuff. Yeah. So it's a bit like, I guess Jampa uses this great analogy. So here we're in different parts of the country here, aren't we? But when we could travel, let's say, I've heard that there is a great city called, let's say, I don't know, Wakefield. Have you heard of Wakefield? It's a small, it's like a little part of Leeds, a little part of East London, in Wakefield. I might offend them, but anyway, it's okay. I've been there a couple of times, but you might kind of think, okay, I've only got enough courage and a kind of enough effort to get to Wakefield. It's going to be a great place. I've heard it's really nice, so I'm going to try that. I've heard there's lots of shops there and some nice restaurants and stuff. So I'm heading off to Wakefield. And then someone says to me, well, if you think a bit further afield and maybe head down towards, let's say, Nottingham, there's some fantastic shops there. You can get better shops there, and there's better restaurants there. And to get to Nottingham, you have to go through, Wakefield anyway. So you'll see all the stuff on Wakefield, but you'll also see all this great stuff when you finally get to Nottingham. So you go, okay, well, I'll go to Nottingham and I'll get all the stuff that's in Wakefield on the way anyway. It's going to be even better. And then someone says, well, if you're looking for the best possible deal, the best possible shops, the best possible restaurants, you should go to London. That's where all the big theatres are. That's where all the museums are. There's so many great things to do. Just a bit further past Nottingham. So I go, well, okay, well, I'll go to Nottingham then if that's the best. And then you go past Wakefield through Nottingham into London. That's still quite right geography-wise, but you get the idea. So you get all the benefits of going through those other places, but in the end, the most quality is found in the furthest one. It's more effort, right? So for the Buddhist, he kind of said, he could see that if he said to someone to make all the effort to go to London right at the beginning, might have been too much and they just kind of give up. So he would say very cleverly, craftily, perhaps, well, just get to Wakefield then. See how you feel when you get to Wakefield. Just try that to start with, and then when you get to Wakefield, well, if you go a little bit further, to Nottingham, you can get any more. And when you get to Nottingham, well, if you go still a little bit further to London, can you imagine? And so we do it in stages. And that's a bit, perhaps where we are. And my friends took me on a bike ride once. And if they'd told me how far the bike ride was going to be at the beginning, I would never have gone because it was just too far. And it's one of those things they kept saying, it's just over the next hill, just over the next hill. I'm thinking, geez, how long is this hill? And when you get over the next one, I say, well, it's just over the next one. And eventually it was I appreciated it because it was really good effort and it was exercise and it was a great place to get to. But if they told me how long it was in the beginning, I would have missed out because I wouldn't have gone. So sometimes, we need a bit of clever psychology to get us there. Preliminary meditations then are these: how to listen to and explain the teachings, how to correctly rely on a spiritual teacher, and the precious human rebirth. Those are before we even get to the small scope. Yeah. and they're very important. How to listen to it and how to explain. We don't necessarily need to worry about how to explain, but we looked a bit at that before with in the La Rain retreat we did, which is about one of the ways is to look at the 6 points of seeing oneself. Basically, it comes from seeing the Buddha as a doctor and yourself as a patient. If we can approach the teachings in that way, we listen with the right kind of intensity, the right motivation, and the right openness. If we see ourselves as having an illness, we're more likely to pay attention and follow the medicine. Yeah. So that's some of the meditations at the beginning to kind of get the right, the most benefit from these meditations and explanations. How to rely correctly on a spiritual teacher. Without a good teacher, you're not going to get from grade 1 to grade 8. If I was a miserable teacher, the piano or guitar or whatever, then my students are going to be a disaster. They're never going to get anywhere, are they? So we have to rely on someone correctly. And it's not only the teacher has to be qualified, but the student has to be able to be a pretty good student to progress. If the teacher is fantastic, but the student does no work whatsoever, can't really be bothered, there's no progress going to happen there either, is there? So that topic is at the beginning really crucial to understanding how we're going to progress, relying on a teacher. We know that already. Right? It's just important to make that clear from a spiritual point of view as well. Precious human rebirth. Then we take essence, we take stock of what we've got, which is really fantastic and really precious for lots of different reasons. It wasn't just by chance, and it has great value. It's not just this random thing we've accumulated over evolution. It's karmically we met this body in these circumstances for very specific reasons, which we created, was given to us, we created it. And that leads us then into the small scope meditations, which is you could lose it today, you could pass away and be moved to the next life. Yeah. So here we're generating the aspiration to think about future lives. And there's no greater one, is there, than thinking, well, actually, I could be in the next life before too long anyway. Isn't it? The point of this meditation, remembering death, isn't to scare ourselves about the moment of death. It's about what comes after. It's about remembering that we do pass on, because most of the time we don't even think about that. And then where we go next. We could end up in a lower realm in the grand scheme of the samsaric system, which would be detrimental to us because we couldn't progress. Then we'll be stuck. Not only will we be suffering, but we'll be stuck, spiritually speaking. So the very first part is we could pass away any moment. It could be today, we don't know when, and we don't know where we're going to go next. So therefore, how we guarantee, if you like, or increase our chances of finding a precious human rebirth next is then to look at refuge, understand karma, and abandon the 10 non-virtuous actions. So see how those two work, that formula works? Generating the aspiration to even think about getting a precious human rebirth next. And then how you do that is to take refuge, which means, to take refuge in one's own mind, essentially, in the end. Understand karma, how it works, and therefore create the causes to be born as a precious human rebirth, as a, next life. Does that make sense? It's all pretty straightforward, isn't it, really? Moving on. Middle scope. Even the upper realm is also pervaded by dissatisfaction, anxiety, low self-esteem, depression. The very fact that we are born means we're going to suffer sickness, and even this tiny microscopic little virus can wipe the whole planet out, as we know. It could bring the whole thing to a standstill. Things are very unstable, even in our precious human rebirth state. Yep. Samsaric existence as a whole is still riddled with problems. Yep. It's not a solution for happiness. It will only bring us in the end uncertainty, dissatisfaction, loneliness, etc. All those are kind of in the system, wired in. If you're born in samsara, those are what you'll experience. It's not to say it's all miserable. We do have moments of happiness, but the happiness is only temporary unless we can escape the uncertainty and escape the suffering completely. The uncertainty is a suffering, in this context. Yep. So then the meditations you do are to try and understand that. You then think about your human existence, and even the upper realms of existence are also unsatisfactory. So to remove those upper realms from your part in that, or your, to be tied into that upper part, you then have to you have to want it, first of all, because we don't right now. We're still convinced this is quite good as it gets. But to generate the aspiration takes a bit of time. And then to put your money where your mouth is, abide by the laws of karma again, is to engage in the 3 higher trainings: ethics, concentration, and wisdom. I'm skipping through it a bit here, but we're just presenting the whole path. That's the point here. So we'll go into it in more detail later. And basically, you know, these 3 higher trainings are about, you know, if you're behaving unethically, it means that the afflictions are in control, harm mostly, I would expect, or attachment, strong cravings and graspings, or anger, you know, trying to hide, you know, stealing and lying and sexual misconduct, or kind of cravings and grasping, which makes the mind excited. So the mind is disturbed because of the afflictions. On that basis, then concentration is going to be next to impossible, because the afflictions disturb the mind. Remember when we talked about afflictions, that's their kind of essence, their nature. So therefore, to try and get any wisdom on the basis of concentration is next to zero. And we need the wisdom realizing emptiness to get out of samsara. So with good ethics, the mind is reasonably stable. Concentration then can be enhanced. And then with the concentration, you can penetrate through with wisdom realizing emptiness, and bam, you're out of samsara. Well, you know, it takes, once you've got the tool, that you can then remove the afflictions in their seeds, which is what we had to remove to get out of samsara, you may remember. With me so far? Good. That's the middle scope done then. And the great scope is, once you're out of samsara yourself, you know, what about everyone else? Which we keep mentioning in our motivation at the beginning, right? So then to generate the wish to liberate everyone else is a massive, you know, undertaking, and it has to be done through methods. It can't just be, you can't just say, okay, yeah, it sounds a great idea, I'm going to do that, and then think you've got bodhicitta. Because what will happen is, you know, when things get difficult, or when sentient beings don't do what you want, say, I'm trying to save you, goddammit, listen to what I'm saying. You know, they don't know what you want, you'll kind of get angry and you'll just abandon, think, oh, well, forget you, I'll go on to someone else. You know, it's very unstable, our compassion and love right now. It needs to be much more developed. It needs to be much more advanced. We're probably at grade 1 or 2. We need grade 8, or, you know, and then some, before it's going to be stable enough for us to be consistent, working for whoever needs help, wherever they are, whatever they do, whatever politics they have, you know, whatever they do to us, doesn't matter. You're still working the same for all living beings, and that's going to require some practice. So that's the aspiration generating there. 7-point method of cause and effect, or equalizing, exchanging oneself with others. So then the practice is to do that, to then become fully enlightened for all living beings, is to practice 6 perfections: generosity, ethics, patience, choice, effort, concentration, and wisdom, which you can find, for example, in the text called Engaging in the Bodhisattva's Deeds by Shantideva, one of the basic program texts. So, yeah. So the aim of the great scope is enlightenment. But by the way, you get liberation and a precious human rebirth until you get there. So your aim is London, but you also pass through Nottingham and Wakefield. You get them anyway. So if you're aiming for full enlightenment, you'll get liberation, you'll get precious human rebirth, you'll just go from happiness to happiness, they say in the text. So it's a win-win situation with that one. But that's university level, great scope. Yeah. It's good to generate the aspiration to go to university right now, if we're in primary school or secondary school, wherever we are. That's where you want to go, but you have to know where you're at right now, isn't it? You have to know you want to become, you know, a fantastic concert pianist and play Mozart, Shostakovich and Rachmaninoff, all these great piano places. But you know, right now you're at grade 1, so you play Twinkle Twinkle Little Star with one hand. You know, so you just need to know where you're at, but you're aspiring to something great. So you keep thinking, that's where I'm going to be, visualizing it, and you generate as much as that as you can, generating as much of these positive 6 perfections as you can. But where your real work is right now is grade 1, yeah, which is remembering death and working on abandoning 10 non-virtuous actions, so we can at least get on the level, on the system working in our direction. Yeah. Okay, so that is the scopes then. So let's just go back a bit and just recap. Outline preliminary meditations, small scope, middle scope, great scope. Each of those small scope, great scope, whatever, had these two parts: how to generate the aspiration, and then what you do, the practices of that scope, that being, if you like. These are the aspirations for those scopes. And if you go for number 3, you get number 2 and 1 in it. You know, if you only aim for number 1, that's all you get. Yeah. Does that make sense? If I'm only going to Wakefield, I'll only see Wakefield. I won't see London or Nottingham. So it's up to you. You know, you're the boss. I'm just telling you what the full path is, presenting the whole path. If you're only ready to think about, you know, next life and not worried about liberation, enlightenment, great, just do that. At least you've got something. We got to start there anyway. You know, if I'm going to London, we're all going to get to Wakefield, isn't it? So even if you're on the path of a great scope being, a path of a small scope being, or path of middle scope being, we're all heading to Wakefield. I don't know if geographically if that's right, but anyway. I should have said Sheffield. I think Sheffield's further over, anyway. Going south. If anybody's listening from another country, we're in the north. We're talking about from north to south there. Leeds is in the north. Nottingham, is Nottingham in midway? Stuart, somewhere like that? Stuart's in Nottingham.
Yeah, it's further south, isn't it?
You're a southerner, are you? Do you think you're a southerner?
Well, it's Leicester, and then it's Northamptonshire, and then it's London. Yeah.
Do you consider yourself a southerner or a northerner or
Midlands? I mean, the River Trent
Midlands?
that goes through Nottingham
Good, that's
is
fine.
about halfway, isn't it?
Analogies is
We're
very
on the
good.
border.
Fine.
But
Good.
we got rid of our shopping centre, so shopping's no good. That's impermanent, though, isn't it?
Okay, so then now it's time for you to have a little discussion here. Basically, the whole module is now going to just revolve around those 3 scopes. The next 3 weeks are going to be about those 3 scopes in detail. A little bit about the preliminaries as well, because they're important. Discussion point here. So for you to think about, discuss the aspirations of those 3 beings, and where do you fit in? Where's your aspirations right now? You got us about it, you know. That's what I'd like to open up to the floor. I'm just going to stop sharing now and also stop recording. Pause. Welcome back for your discussion groups. So, does anybody want to feedback from their group about, you know, what we thought about these aspirations and where you fit in? What are your aspirations? It's an interesting, wasn't it? Because, you know, if I think about my own day, when today did I think about next life? I don't think I did at any point. I think back. So I'm not, you know, I'm not thinking about even the small scope motivation yet. Did you think about next life at all today?
No.
Interesting, isn't it?
Yeah.
We tend to be just thinking about here and now and next week if we're lucky, or a few months down the line, but we don't think about next life so much.
I think the older you are, the more you start to think about it,
Right.
because, more real, and more likely that your life is, you're going to die, sooner rather. So I think there is, but I think it's, I just remember doing the reading, turning the wheel, and a talk, and where the first paragraph was about our internal experiences are unique, and we live in a private universe of our own mind. And that just reminded me that, you know, you go into class and you listen to people, you think, gosh, I'm nowhere near there. I can't possibly, I'll never get there. But we're all so unique, and our experiences have been created your interpretation of our experiences is different to yours, to anybody else's. And that's got to be acknowledged, is what I felt. And that, you know, stop beating ourselves up if we're not going to get to A, B, C, or D. It's where we're at, and we study from that place, and we try and understand it on that basis, not aspire or anyway. Sorry. Nope.
Yep. I understand what you're saying. Yep.
No, but
it's like you can't but inspired when you see these great artists or people who spent, what is it, they say 10,000 hours to become an expert in something. You just think, wow, it almost seems like it's a gift from God, or they were kind of blessed, you know, automatically that makes them just fantastic musicians or artists or whatever. But really, it's just a case that they've done so many hours and hours, literally hours and hours, that become this phenomenal, inspirational. Everyone goes, wow. I mean, to listen to them and look at their art, etc., and hear their words is just so inspiring. So, you know, we're all potentially those great professionals and experts in our fields spiritually. You know, not forget not about worldly disciplines, but spiritually speaking, we can be professionals. That's all it just takes, you know, hours and hours of practice. No different, unfortunately. But they're very inspiring people, and we could be them too, you know. I wanted to show you some work I did when I was at the monastery studying. I loved outlines. Outlines became very special to me. So I did this whole chart about the outline of the entire Lamrim Chenmo. I went 2 pages, so you have to hold this on extra sheet. And I kind of just basically took all the outlines that were in the book and just summarized them into the main headings. And then the green section was small scope, the red section was the little scope, and then the blue section probably was all the great scope stuff. And so what I learned was that outlines are really important when you're studying. I can't emphasize that enough. I'm going to emphasize that a bit when we do the basic program foundation days too. That, you know, sometimes in the monasteries, the monks and nuns, they just learn outlines, memorize outlines. And even that is actually a really great way to study and learn about texts and how the Buddha taught and how we can change our minds. I've never memorized all that outline, but, you know, just to memorize, for example, the basic outline of a Lamrim, you know, what are the main meditations, or at least what the scopes are. Even that is setting up a system where you can then slot in things later on when you hear explanations. So they're really important. Okay, I'm just going to move on to a final slide then, and then we'll wrap up today. I'm just going to mute, move on. So here's something from, oops, I've gone backwards. Wait. Oh wait, I can't go backwards now. Stop. Technology is working against me. 1 moment. Okay, yeah, so this is some words from Lama Zopa, and Lama Zopa says here, I'll just read it out because you can't read the screen. Practice mindfulness under 3 principal aspects of the path to enlightenment: renunciation, bodhicitta, and right view. Then everything done with renunciation becomes the cause of liberation and does not become the cause of samsara. Then everything done with bodhicitta becomes the cause of enlightenment. Then with the right view, everything becomes a remedy to samsara, a remedy to ignorance, which is the root of all your suffering, your samsara. The root of all your sufferings is samsara. It eliminates that. That's what you need. So there's different ways of, masters over the years have talked about, since the teacher talked about the principal points that you need to think about in the Lamrim. And a nice way to think about it is these 3 principal aspects: renunciation, bodhicitta, and right view. Doesn't mention much of that small scope there, but renunciation is the view that wants to be free from samsara. That's the aspiration of the middle scope, just a nice way of saying it, or an old-fashioned way, probably, renunciation. We wish to be free from samsara. That's the aspiration of this middle scope practitioner. And how the middle scope practitioner does that is with the right view that removes the suffering and the seeds. Yeah. And then the aspiration for the Great Scope practitioner is then mentioned there with bodhicitta. So those three principal aspects of the path is another way to memorize an outline, if you like. And there's a nice text, a prayer, I don't know, it's about a dozen verses or so, called The Three Principal Aspects of the Path by Lama Tsongkhapa, which is a nice one to look at and read. There's another a prayer that Lama Tsongkhapa wrote to look at the principal points of the path called The Foundation of All Good Qualities, which is about another 12, 15 verses, starting with the foundation of all good qualities, the kind and perfect pure guru. So it kind of goes through all the outlines, if you like, of the Lam Rim. So another way of memorizing the outlines is to memorize one of these texts. And if you're looking at completing this module with the completion cards that I sent earlier, you'll see in the text in the small print there, maybe you haven't seen it, is that you have to memorize a Lam Rim prayer. Dum, dum, dum. You know, some in monasteries, they recite pages and pages of things they've learned from memory. It's just phenomenal what you can remember. Your capability of your mind to remember things is actually much more powerful than you think. I'm a bit daunted now to think about memorizing lots of verses, but I did it a lot when I was younger because I trained as a musician. So to memorize verses in a song, I had to do all the time. So, and as an actor and actress, you have to remember all these lines. But now it's a bit frightening. But do you feel capable to do that? If you want to take that up as a challenge, I would recommend that you use the foundation of all good qualities, because that's one that's we've used before at Jamming Leads quite a bit. Or you can do this three principal aspects of the path. Or another option is to use one that Lama Zopa wrote called, there's a few verses at the beginning of a text he wrote called Transforming a Suffering Life into Happiness, something like that, some daily practice. So what I'll do is I'll email those out on the Slack channel later on, so you can have a choice of some of those prayers to memorize. If you don't memorize it, it's fine, but at least read through it a few times. But if you want to think about doing the completion card for this module, do see if you can memorize a few verses, see how far you get. If you do a few each week, you know, it's definitely possible. 2 or 3 verses each week. Over the next 4 or 5 weeks, you'll have them all, you know. And each time you'll add a new verse on, you go back to the ones you've already memorized and just keep adding them on, you know. It's a really good way to meditate. And that's why a lot of the memorization is done in the monasteries, because when you debate, if you have these texts and things in your mind right there, you know, you don't have to use Google, using your own Google, your own mental Google, then it's really, it goes really quick and profoundly. So yeah, so let's finish there then, and let's do a dedication together, so we can dedicate all those positive karmic seeds we created. Next week we'll continue with the preliminaries and the small scope, as we get some of the details of that in the 3rd session. So 3, 4, and 5 sessions will be about those small, middle, great scopes. Okay, thank you. Let's do a little meditation to end with. So all those seeds we've planted in our minds were generated with this motivation, a refuge and bodhicitta at the beginning. So now we have something, you know, substance or an essence to positive karma, positive karmic seeds to dedicate and decide how you want those to ripen. These seeds will ripen for us in some happiness. It could ripen as just the happiness of this life. We could choose to have them ripen as happiness in future lives, and make sure we get guaranteed to get a precious human rebirth next life, increase the chances of that. We could choose to dedicate them for liberation from samsara completely, the whole cycle of birth, death, sickness, aging, be done with the whole thing, and liberate ourselves so we can experience real happiness, sublime happiness that you can't go back from it, it's forever, that happiness. Or we could choose to dedicate for full enlightenment, removing all the obstacles in the mind, become fully awakened, and spend all of our waking moments helping our dear mother sentient beings with all these great tools we'll have as an enlightened being, which we can't even imagine. You know, they're just phenomenal. So, you know, the further away we get from where we are now, those are the more profound. You know, if we multiply all this positive karmic seeds by all living beings, you know, it's just a phenomenal amount of positive happiness for ourselves and others. So if we can feel brave enough to do that, you'll get liberation. You get happiness in future lives. You'll get happiness in this life, just by the way. So it's up to you. Dedicate whatever you feel comfortable with. And we dedicate that all the confusion and concern and death and sickness happening around the planet now may subside and people may find some peace and contentment. That our centers for spirituality and happiness around the world may grow and flourish. And that the long lives of our teachers, the founders, may be healthy and long so we continue to learn from them. Especially for His Holiness the Dalai Lama and Lama Zopa Rinpoche, without whom, you know, we wouldn't have this lineage from the Buddha. So let's recite this verse once in Tibetan. You can recite with me if you like. Chanchu Sancho Rinpoche Ma Ke Panam Ke Gyurji Ke Wanyam Pa Me Payam Gone Gondu Pewar Sho. Thank you, everybody. Have a lovely evening. See you next week for part 3.
Thank you.
Everybody.
Thanks, Eric. Thanks, everybody.
Okay.
Thank
Thank you,
you.
everybody.
Bye now.
See you next.
Bye.
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 Nice to see you, Carly.
Bye.